The Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, insights, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm Christophe Difo.
I'm Sean Prophet.
And I'm Joe Kipinti.
OG listeners will remember Liz from episode 79, titled Woman's Work. In that episode, we discussed the invisible labor women perform in our patriarchal social system. Well, Liz and I have teamed up for a new segment that will air once a month or so on the Radical Secular Podcast. The segment will consider the pressing social issues of our time from the perspective of my experience as a Black person and Liz's experience as a woman, and their experience of our guests, our future guests, all with the goal of explicitly elevating marginalized voices. Today is our inaugural episode, and it features a conversation Liz and I had about intergenerational trauma. What is intergenerational trauma anyway? How do the Buffalo murders and the abortion crackdowns, all of it, how does it fit into that framework? What can we do about it? Can we do anything about it? Stick around after the t-shirts to find out. After that, you'll hear Joe, Sean, and I react to the spate of mass shootings that have slammed our nation over the last several weeks. I know we're all reeling from that. But first, I want to remind you that if you like our show, to make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels. You should also check out our journal at theradicalsecular.com. The Radical Secular Podcast is brought to you by Cannibal & Co., located in downtown Jersey City and at shopcannibal.com. Cannibal, that's Cannibal with a K, stocks a rotating collection of goods ranging from apparel and accessories to home furnishings and fine jewelry. Cannibal weaves together its forward-thinking vision with its traditional roots to provide an expertly curated experience of unique and locally sourced finds. We're grateful to Cannibal for sponsoring our show. Now, let's get into the t-shirts. Sean, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, I'm wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt because I had already planned to wear this Black Lives Matter t-shirt after the Buffalo massacre because obviously we need to underscore that. But then this whole other thing happened. It's still appropriate because we didn't really even have time to grieve that Buffalo massacre before we were right into the next one. So this has been a devastating time on top of other devastating things that have happened before. It seems like the entire takeover coup, civil war, race war is accelerating, and it's very daunting for us here. It is, and I hear you on that. I hear you. It's been, and I know it's been tough for all of us here. Joe, you want to jump on?
Well, for that reason, because it has been so tough, this is what I chose to wear today.
Right, the breathe t-shirt, right?
With a tree.
I think it's super important that it's not a false equivalency between either you are activist and fighting and struggling and resisting, and your mental health. You have to take care of yourself in order so that you can be happy, but also you can be effective at social justice. I mean, the two things go hand in hand. It's not, so I think it's really important that we do take care of ourselves. And I know that Liz will be talking about that with you a little bit later, but I think we can come back to that after.
A great point. Both of you, great points. And that is something that as Liz and I developed this segment, and hopefully Liz will be able to join us on the main show as well, but when she has the time. Her time is limited, but what we're trying to definitely emphasize on this segment is one of the things we want to emphasize, besides elevating marginalized voices, which is certainly the primary aim, and tell those stories, but also to talk about, right, how do we survive this? I mean, that's how do we, like you say, Joe, maintain the mental health that we need to be able to do whatever we can to pitch in, whatever that ends up being. Right. And that is, that's hard. That's hard. I mean, and I frankly think given the way things are going, that's going to be one of the major challenges we all face, I think. And if the last several weeks were any indication of that, it's not going to be easy,
No.
to say the least. It's not. Well, today I'm wearing, well, let me first just give a little background. I'm leaving in a week on a motorcycle trip to the Alaskan backcountry, and we're going to do that among other things. And I tend to read old war stories when I'm preparing for an adventure motorcycle trip, stories about the Vietnam War in particular. They tend to help me get mentally prepared. And a passage I read recently, a normally jovial black private, his name is Private Cortell, loses it when a white gunnery sergeant who has demonstrated himself to be kind of racist in the past, and he makes a comment. It's not even a racist comment. It's just a seemingly benign comment. But all the pent up fury of the relentless white supremacy that Cortell has dealt with in the Marine Corps comes pouring out in that moment. And I can identify with that experience. I've really felt like just really, really losing it at some point every day over since Buffalo. And, I'm really, really sick of waking up every morning and facing white supremacy and facing whiteness and all that entails. I really, really am. And I'm sick of the majority of white America's just indifference to it. It's really, really hard. It is really, really hard. And as I try to explain this kind of stuff, it's difficult to have people brush it off or say it's not that important or whatever it is. And, I know all of us as progressives are mourning and are hurting, but I'm at least in terms of Buffalo, black people are hurting worse. And the other thing too is that black people and trans people, like, this is like the norm. This is how it always is, right? Like I think for a lot of white progressives, white people, it's like, oh, things are escalating, but it's like, this has been the world for a long time. And I don't want to get into that, but the point is that I'm wearing this shirt because, black soldiers in Vietnam often wore nooses around their necks to protest the fact that they were forced to fight in a war for a country that hated them. And, I felt that. And so I'm wearing my T-shirt that is a noose, the image of a noose around my neck in solidarity, because that is absolutely where I am, and that is absolutely where I've been. And I have been this close to flipping the fuck out practically every single day. And that's gonna, and I hate to make that the tenor of the show, but this is a serious show and we're talking about serious stuff, and I think all progressives are in mourning, at this moment. We're watching sort of things slip away from us. We're going to just jump right from here into the Difo and Liz segment, but Sean, Joe, and I will see you on the other side. Please enjoy. So to back up, we started this idea about this show like over a month ago, right? And then all of a sudden, since then and now, a lot has happened, right? The abortion leak happened, Buffalo happened, now Texas, and also other mass shootings have happened, but this is the worst one, so far.
Yeah, just less devastating ones.
Less devastating ones, the ones that didn't involve 10-year-old children.
Right.
And it's weird that we decided to do it this time. It feels like every time we get together to talk, we are behind the eight ball. Like the show that we were gonna do is talking about something that happened before, and now there's something new and horrible happening. I mean, so how are you doing with this particular horror?
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about it, like, yes, it feels like it's a crisis a week, and not like a crisis, but like each one of these should be just like earth-shattering, shifting, seismic things. But you don't even have time to absorb it. Like, I kept seeing all these things about, like, the Buffalo victims haven't even been buried yet. Like, you can't even catch your breath. But I was thinking about it and how much all these things are connected, you know? So it kind of just keeps reinforcing the same underlying points.
They do.
But how am I doing? I'm tired. I'm very tired. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. It's, as a parent, it just activates like every fight or flight function in my body, you know? You can't help but imagine your child in that situation. And I also don't like that that's what it takes sometimes to get people on board. But it's there. You know, I have to admit that it's there. Because that's the first thing that happens. These children are my son's age. I can hear his school is around the corner from my house, and I have the windows open. I could hear them at recess.
Wow. And
when I hear children in the playground, I feel afraid. It's triggering. It makes me feel anxious. It's just tiring because it's that whole thing. Nothing changes. Everyone comes out and does the same things, has the same arguments, same bullshit. It completely shifts focus off of actually doing anything to solve the problem and just proving who's right and who's wrong about what the problem is. And at the end of the day, it was disheartening thinking about all the other things. Like last night, I was lying there in bed just thinking about this and feeling devastated, and the numbers kept going up. And at one point, I'm trying to like calm my mind down. And suddenly I thought, oh, fuck, there's also climate change.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
And oh, yeah, we might be hit with a nuke. Like all these things that you put on the back burner, and it just feels so overwhelming because at the end of the day, for me, if we as a nation can't come together and rally around the idea of keeping our children safe in their schools, then there's no hope for us. How can we, if we can't agree on that, then how can we agree on literally anything else? That's just a very basic, like, it's a biological imperative to take care of the young of your species. It's not something that you even have to think about. People feel these things. And so to me, if you can't, the fact that there's even an argument is just, it just makes me feel so tired.
Yeah.
So that's basically where I'm at now. How are you doing?
No, shit, man. I feel all of that. And, you know, we were talking before, and I'll say it again here, is that, as I'm listening to this unfold, and getting the news alerts and, you know, still very much reeling from the Buffalo shootings, right? And what jumped into my head is that I can't imagine, like, I'm not a parent, right? And we don't have plans to be parents. I can only imagine what it feels like to be in the position where it's like, holy shit, that could have been my kid, right? Like, I mean, and Houston, right? Houston is still Texas, but Houston isn't rural Texas where you think that everybody has a gun, right? This is a Latino community in Texas, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, if it could happen in a place like Houston, right? You feel like it could happen anywhere. And it could. I mean, right? Buffalo, New York, right? This is not some bastion of conservatism, mm-hmm. right? And that is really, really hard to even fathom from a parental perspective. And what I've been trying to do is, and this is a concept that I've been really working with, is this idea of radical empathy. And because, and you kind of were just saying this, I think, in a way, and that is, we're not able to change. We human beings have this unbelievable capacity to disassociate other people's pain. And to be fair, I can see this as an evolutionary development, right? I mean, if I felt everyone else's pain the same way I feel my own pain, I would not be able to function. I'm barely able to function feeling my own fucking pain, let alone feeling someone across the country's pain. But of course, just because it's natural doesn't make it good. And the problem is we live in a society, an interconnected society now. And other people's problems are my problems. In fact, they are very much my problems. And so as so we have to find a way to be radically empathetic, to be able to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and that's the only way, to your point, where we derive the motivation to change. And conservatives are really, really good at not caring about what other people feel, and unless they're in their tribe, right? We liberals are better at it, but even we liberals aren't so good at it.
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. And in a lot of ways, I sort of feel like that is boiling down for me to be almost the mission of our little thing that we're doing here is because like you said, to hold other people's pain as fully as if it was your own, especially in the world we live in where you're connected to everybody. You couldn't. It's the same reason that when I lived in New York, you can't say hello to every person you pass by because you wouldn't be able to speak after the first hour. Whereas in the burbs, now I can say hi to everybody that I pass. But it's a volume thing. You just can't hold it inside you. And I also think there's so much going on right now in particular that we're so burnt out on outrage and fear and feeling helpless that taking on somebody else's on top of that, or even just another crisis on top of that, can feel incredibly overwhelming. And so I think that maybe what we could have here is a space where we talk about how to hold awareness and feelings about situations and anger and frustration without letting it destroy us. And being able to, because if it destroys you, then you can't do anything about it, right? So you need to be able to, this is my struggle lately, is to somehow hold these two things as truths, both my regular life where I'm with my children and my husband and I'm living my life in my little community and doing my little things, but also having a larger awareness of what's happening and doing what I can in the world. I'm not being very successful at this point because right now I'm I get a PTA email and I just delete it because I'm I can't fucking think about that. That doesn't matter. So this is something that I'm reaching for is a way to have both.
Yeah. That's such a, wow. I totally feel you on that because that is such a struggle that I have as well. How do I always joke about with my wife, we are quintessential yuppies, right? We literally moved into Jersey City, rode the wave where we bought a house cheap and now it's worth a lot of money, right? We've got 2 cats and no kids, right? I mean, we go out to brunch and shit, and I'm how, and we go on vacation and that's our life, right? And I'm I was in South Africa in October. And I rode from Johannesburg down to Cape Town, and those places are relatively modern cities, but you go to the middle of South Africa, and people are living a real deal Africa life, right? Real deal Africa life. And I'm riding through on a $30,000 motorcycle, right? And I'm what the fuck am I actually doing here? Right? And and on a smaller scale here in my own life, right? I'm living this life. And meanwhile, how do I balance that with the poverty that I see? How do I balance that with other Black people who are suffering and I get to live this life as a Black person, right? And how do you balance those two things in your head and stay sane at the same time? Really try to contribute, right? We're just a little podcast trying to impact the people that are in our lives, right? That's what we're trying to do here. And it all feels so impotent. It feels really frustrating. But that said, and this goes to, I think with the space that's like you're talking, what we can do with this space is try our best to explore how to do that. How can we be radically empathetic while staying sane, right? How can we do those things? How can we, it's like, how can we hold those two ideas in our head at the same time? And that's hard. That's hard.
Yes.
You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a journey.
It's a journey.
We'll take it together.
And we'll take it together. That's exactly right. And I think it's a great way to sort of segue into the intergenerational trauma. And I like transgenerational trauma too. I think that's another, as I was reading about this, is another phrase that came up a lot. But I'm going to let you take the lead here. Not let you. That sounds like very gross. Yeah, thank you so much for letting me take the lead.
Well, let's start with, defining it. I'm going to call it generational trauma just because every time I try to call it other things, I stumble over my words. And I feel like we all know what we're saying. We know what we're talking about. So there are actually two kinds of this type of trauma. One is intergenerational, which is in a family unit that's passed down. It can be things that you learned from your parents, things that coping mechanisms you developed as a result of seeing behaviors in your home, anything like trauma that happens within a family, and then the aftershocks are felt in that family's generational line, and then historical trauma happens to a large group of people. So, Jewish people after the Holocaust, Black people, gender non-conforming folks, women, all those groups. Obviously, they're connected, right? Because historical trauma will impact the families that are in that group as well. But I just found it helpful to delineate that. And then you can argue that it's passed down in two ways. So there's obviously behavioral, which I alluded to before. So you learn things from your parents, or you learn things from your environment. I'll speak from my own experience as a woman. You grow up in a culture that tells you to survive, you need to do X, Y, and Z. So like sort of what you learn from your environment, what you learn from your parents, or your own experiences in the world. But then there's a genetic component, which is, I did dig into some of the research on this, but it's a little chewy for me. So there have been studies that looked at like actual physical changes in survivors of the Holocaust and major traumatic events, and they saw that there were actually changes on the genetic level. So we don't really know why that is, but there it is. So there's our definition. There's our
overarching definition, and I appreciate that, Liz. And like I was saying earlier, it's weirdly fortuitous that we chose transgenerational trauma as our topic for our first show together, and neither one of us, I don't think, pretend to be experts on the subject. But I also don't think that either one of us need to be experts to understand that transgenerational trauma has had, and I'm going to talk about this from the Black experience, right, has been extremely impactful in terms of Black community. And Black communities, not just in the United States, although the chattel slavery element here in the United States is particularly heinous, but this is a problem worldwide. I read a great article on the subject and identified 3 of countless ways. Really countless ways. I couldn't even wrap my mind around how many ways transgenerational trauma has impacted the Black community. But some of the big ones include issues related to self-esteem, internalized depression. And I think the internalized depression one is really interesting because boy, do I identify with that. And you can see it in most obvious ways with, Black women straightening their hair, right, to look white, right? Lightening creams, were a thing for a very long time in the Black community. And then there's the classic Black doll study where Black girls and boys are given a Black doll and a white doll and asked which one is bad. And they consistently point to the Black doll. So this is, and this study was replicated. This happened, I think, a long time ago, but then it was replicated recently. So, and boy, I can just identify with all of those outcomes. And the most important takeaway I found while investigating this issue is that, and I just kept coming back to this every time I read another article, it was that every element of Black culture developed essentially as a coping mechanism, right? A survival strategy in response, in direct response to the institution of slavery and white supremacy and racism, from problems related to I mean, there's so many problems. Liz, there are so many problems, but from problems in parenting the Black community to African-American cultural staples, food, music, all of it, right? To the behavior patterns of Black individuals in groups and as individuals, right? You cannot understand the Black community outside of the context of transgenerational trauma and white supremacy. So, like I said, I'm not an expert on this topic, and anyone who's interested in understanding this issue more fully should check out Dr. Joy, I can't say her name, Joy Degree Leary, and she coined, we'll add that to the show notes, she coined the term post-traumatic slave syndrome, and I cannot think of a better way to sum up the concept. It was really overwhelming to delve into the research. I was just like, oh my God. And then I start seeing it in my own life. I'm just like, oh God, you know, it's super intense. And I'm sure from the female perspective is probably pretty similar, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's like an unraveling, right, of everything that you thought was solid.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
I'm trying not to, I guess it's human to identify, but so much of what you are saying is resonating with me from a woman's perspective.
Speak to me.
It's very interesting.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, I will. So first, I was thinking the idea that every aspect of Black culture is derived as a trauma response, right? A survival mechanism. First of all, you can apply that on a macro level or a micro level, like in families. I'm reading this amazing book right now. Oh,
ready to go.
Right here.
Nice.
The Body Keeps the Score. And it's basically about PTSD, but it's fascinating. But anyway, it talks about how most of the things, any dysfunction we have, started out as a survival mechanism in childhood. And you can say the same thing about entire groups. I guess this is the other thing. It's the intergenerational trauma / historical trauma. It's the micro and the macro. And it's same thing with being a woman. Like, the more that you become aware of the patriarchy, the more you see. And the more you see, and the more you see. I mean, I went to college. I started my college career at Douglas at Rutgers, which is an all-girls college. And I remember being so annoyed that I had to take a women's studies class in my first year, because I thought, like, women's lib is over. We totally have equality. I mean, I was 18. What did I know? So then I took this class, and I just remember it was like somebody had like lifted this cloth off of my eyes. And it was literally, Difo, it was just the surface. It was just the surface, because that was when I was 18 and I am now 43. And I feel like I am constantly unveiling new layers. You know, there are so many things. Fucking language. Like, the standard for a human is man. Women are not in the Constitution. Black people are not in the Constitution.
It goes on and on and on, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, and that's like fundamental. Like, and we spoke about this briefly, I think, in our first conversation about the idea that, like, that women, or that movies that center Black people or movies that center women are called Black movies or chick flicks. And all other movies are just movies with white dudes in them. And everyone else is expected to watch that, because that's the prototype human, is the white man. And we are expected to project our experiences onto that person. But to ask them to do the same for our movies is just inconceivable.
Oh no! Now you're a feminazi. now you're a terrorist.
Yes. Yep. 100%. So, I mean, that's just to scratch the surface. But I every aspect of being a woman is developed as a coping mechanism. How to not get raped. How to like, survive in a world where you're not allowed to have a job. I mean, obviously we're talking about the way it used to be, but the fact that women only exist historically in terms of their connection to a man. It's your father, and then it's your husband, and then it's your son.
Yeah.
So we're still very young and coming out of that.
Yeah.
The fact that I can get a bank account doesn't mean that all that other stuff just disappears. It's deep in the psyche.
It really is. And this concept of intergenerational, right? It doesn't just go away. I mean, you and I are people who are specifically looking for it, and it's hard to find. Right. Specifically looking for it, and it's hard to mine it out of ourselves. And we're sitting here literally doing a podcast about it, and we're talking about how difficult it is. Then you have Joe fucking Schmo out here, and this includes progressive liberal dudes, by the way, who are just like, nah, I got this. I'm an anti-racist. I'm good. What are you talking about? Like, there's nothing more to look, nothing more to see here, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't beat women, so
I'm good. I don't beat women.
Fine.
I respect my wife and my girlfriend. Look, we split the chores, so it's all good, right? Right? Nothing else to see here.
Yeah. Or people who say, like, I would never hit a woman because I have a daughter, and
that's where you go with that. Like, that's where you go with that, right?
Right. Not because you're a human in your own right, but because I understand what it's like to love someone who's like you. So therefore I will give you humanity.
And that goes back to the point we were making at the top, right? This, like, people are unable to be empathetic, like unable to put themselves in it's like, I can't put myself in the situation of what it would be like to be a woman in this culture, right? Like that's something that I actively try to do. But one of the reasons why I actively try to do it is because I want people to do that with blackness, right? But if you're a white dude, there's like there's just no good reason to do it. And what's your motivation to do it?
What's your motivation?
Right? You're ready at the top.
Sitting on the top.
Ready at the top, and especially and I hate to beat on progressive guys here, but like those are the guys that are even possible to talk to, which is why conservative guys just like it's not I'm not wasting my breath, but progressive guys out there listening to this, it's like you're at the top of the pile, and just because you're pro progress, just because you are a thoughtful liberal doesn't mean that your work is over. It doesn't that's just the very beginning. That is the very beginning.
When you're at the top of the pile, it shouldn't be the people who are underneath you who are doing the hard work. Like when you're at the top of the pile, that means more is required of you than just not adding to the harm. Like you need to be actively undoing harm. And if you don't know how to do that, then you need to be asking questions. And then you need to be listening and actually believing
and listening is
what
so
people
key.
are telling you. And not filtering it through your own experiences and saying, well, it doesn't match up with my experience. So therefore, there's something flawed in what they're saying.
So true.
I mean, I think I can imagine living in a world where you never, and I shouldn't say never, hashtag not all men.
Hashtag not all.
But just, I don't want to be painted as a man hater. But
the poor men are just not being equally and properly represented. They're being misrepresented by you. The poor men. Right.
Poor men. Yeah. But that's the thing. I think more is required of you than just adding to the harm.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think a lot of it is shutting up. I think a lot of it is saying like elevating marginalized voices, which is, I think one of the things we're going to be trying to do on this show is elevating marginalized voices. I think a lot of it is being prepared to do the inside work of discovering where I could be better, where I need to be better, right? And being prepared to do that work as a man, as a progressive man, right? As a progressive guy, but knowing that I'm just peeling back layers of the onion, like, and those layers will never stop. I've never done enough. And I think that's I don't know. I think that's important.
So
what do we talk about next? Oh, Buffalo. Yes.
Buffalo. Well, speaking of see, I can't say it. Speaking of generational trauma, we talked a lot about what happened to Texas, but a mere 11 days ago, there was a racist bastard just shot up a bunch of Black people. So what was that like for you? What was your I can't imagine, I feel like with Texas, there's been a pretty large general outcry. And it didn't feel like that from my perspective with Buffalo. There was an outcry, but it didn't feel quite as universal. I don't know if you noticed that.
I noticed.
What was your...
I noticed, Liz.
I mean... I don't know what's on your feed. Maybe you follow better people than I do.
With you. They're really...
But yeah.
Man, I really appreciate the question, Liz. I don't have a whole lot of people in my life that ask me these questions, so I really do appreciate it. And for everyone out there, I didn't set this question up. Liz set this question up. I did not. So this is a genuine thank you, Liz.
It's true.
And, I've been on quite a personal journey since I heard the news in Buffalo. Interestingly, reading about transgenerational trauma as preparing for this episode has really placed my Buffalo experience into context. And one of the effects of transgenerational trauma in the Black community I've recently learned is the tendency, and this was, oh boy, this hit so close to home, hurtfully close to home, is to use the master-servant relationship as a model for personal relationships in general. This includes parent-child relationships, but relationships in general. And as I look back on my life, as I look at my life now, I can see how that dynamic has pervaded my relationships. And especially, and Liz, I mean especially my relationships with white men. It has been, it's just this creepy thing that, and I'm reading about this, Black people, the core of enslaving Black people, enslaving anybody, is to remove their subjectivity, their personhood. People of enslaved Africans, and by the way, out there, stop calling people slaves. That just sounds so fucking awful. Stop that. It is enslaved people, enslaved Africans. It is that I hate that. Enslaved Africans, they were purposefully treated as just without empathy, right? First of all, because you had to justify enslaving people, but second, developing this disconnect, removing the personhood of that individual was critical. And what's fucked up, and this is the whole transgenerational trauma thing, is that is how the Black community started thinking about how relationships ought to be, especially mother-son, mother-child relationships, and the trauma that has cascaded down through the generations as a result of that is really astonishing. And boy, it's felt very personal.
Yeah. Wow. I've never even considered that. But of course it does.
Yeah.
Of course it did.
It's fucking wild. And I hadn't considered that either until I started reading in preparation for this episode. So, as you know, Liz, I'm in the process of writing a series of short stories from which I will end up putting together a memoir about my weird ass life, and including drugs, and including cults, and including being Black, and all kinds of weird things. But coincidentally, the primary theme of the most recent story that I wrote was all about my complicated relationship with white men. So, I expected that it would be hard to write about those relationships. Those were like those relationships from back then, right? Writing about who I was back then, and even talking, and even just taking a hard look at who I am now. It's really hard to face the part of myself that back then, and still, hopefully to a lesser extent now, is driven by those transgenerational patterns. And it doesn't surprise me that writing about those relationships is challenging, but expecting the challenge is not the same thing as going through the challenge, right? We talked about this in terms of Roe.
Yeah.
We all expected this from the Supreme Court, but
right. And yet it was still
somehow
shocking,
it was still like a punch in the gut. Like, oh my God, this is actually happening.
Right.
Each time I spend a month or 2 months really delving into my past and scrutinizing who I am today and who I was back when I was ashamed, frankly, of being Black. And that's not even easy to say now. I experienced some pretty strong emotional repercussions that can be really intense. I know you know a little something about intense emotional responses to stuff. Another reason why I like you so much.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Who, me?
Yeah, man. I like to the idea that of becoming aware that something that you either just thought was like a personality trait, or you didn't even notice about yourself, and then you notice that you're doing it, and then that came from trauma.
It's a real mindfuck.
It's a real mindfuck.
It's a real mindfuck. And this goes to what you were saying before, right? Like,
yeah, man.
You're 43 and you started to learn about this stuff at age 18, but it's just what a journey it is to continue. If you're being self-reflective, if you're paying attention to yourself, you're like, holy shit, this just keeps going and going and going,
Yeah. Yeah. And listening too, right? Because a lot of, for me, especially the last 5 years or so, has been listening to people, listening to their experience. And you know what? You talk about internalized racism, internalized misogyny over here. Because first person to call people crazy feminists, and back in the day.
Yep.
Because it's scary. It's scary. You don't want to think of yourself
That's
as
so
being
interesting
oppressed.
that you say that, because maybe there's another way in which our experience really overlaps, is because I was one of the Black people back then, when I was young, when I was in high school growing up, who would have been oh, come on, everything's equal now. What are you talking about? Right. And it took me a long time. It was quite a journey. And maybe that's why I'm so passionate about it now.
Yeah.
So I had just submitted this story for publication when the Buffalo News dropped, and and these targeted white supremacist killings always feel super, super fucking personal. And I think they are very personal to any Black person who's politically or socially aware. It feels as if it's directed at me personally. And one of but I think the hardest thing about dealing with the Buffalo murders was white silence, right? And each time something like this happens, I'm reminded that these events don't register as devastating with the white people in my life, but that, right, it's not just that though. It's it doesn't even occur to those white people in my life that the events would be devastating to me, right? And the result is that I end up feeling like an outsider, not only in society and in the country I live, but even within the mostly white circle in which I spend most of my life. And that, I think, is the most difficult thing. And so all of this happened really right at the same time. I was reeling after writing the story. Then Buffalo happened, really the day after I submitted it for publication. And I was just oh man, that sucks.
Yeah. That was a 1-2 punch, and you're I got to sit with this for a minute.
Tough, it was tough. But I mean, life is hard, and I'm not sitting. I don't need a pity party. I'm just trying to express that's just what happened.
Do you feel you said you exist in a mostly white world. Do you feel, and that you feel alone when people don't recognize that this impacts you and how much it impacts you? Do you feel like that other times? Or do you know what I mean? Like, do you feel other?
Yeah, that's mostly what
often?
I feel, I would say. One thing that I've been trying to do in the last couple of years is, and this sounds so like tokenism, and it sounds awful, but I'm going to just be honest about it. And that is, is I have to go out of my way to connect with Black people. My life is white, very, very white. And it's only recently in the last several years that I've realized the toll that's taken on me. Because it's basically constantly feeling like not 100% part of a group. And and the psychological toll, again, this is something that I'm really like, I've gotten into being Black probably more so over the last 10 years, but this little nugget, this little element, and the extent to which that has impacted the person I've become is very new. I think within the last year or two. And it's hard. It's really hard because, because even the people, honestly, the only people that it's white progressive women are by far the best, right? Of white, of being able to identify with white people, right? And I'm going to be perfectly frank here. It's hard with white men. It is genuinely difficult. I'm on defense. Yeah. It is hard. It is really hard, not because they mean it, but because it's just who they are. And it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, they're coming from a place of privilege where, like we were saying before, they've never had their hand forced and had to examine or understand what your situation feels like. But at the same time, you've got this intergenerational programming that kind of like puts you also at a disadvantage because you're like primed to play. Yes.
Oh my God. That's exactly it. Liz, that's exactly it. Oh, that's exactly it. And trying to explain that to a white guy, especially progressive white guys, they don't want to think that about themselves. So they're very defensive against it.
Right.
For conservative guys, obviously, this is a conversation I'm not having with anybody. I'm talking about the most progressive guys I know, right? It's hard to have those conversations and I find that progressive white women get it because you're used to fucking patriarchy. So you get it. You have some context for it,
Yeah.
But you put it together just now. Like,
it's funny because
that was important.
Oh, good. I try. But you're talking about straddling worlds. And I feel like as a white woman, that's very much my experience because I have that white privilege. And yet I also feel like I have an ability to understand where marginalized groups are coming from that a white man doesn't have. So I kind of like, I'm kind of like in between, and we're also ignoring like an entire group of, we could be each other's allies in this because we both have an understanding to an extent of the other's experience. Whereas like you were saying, trying to explain it to a white man, God bless his heart, can try as hard as he wants, but he can only understand it to a point, right? If you don't have that visceral experience of the lived experience. And I think, for me, I also
please do
mentioned this last time. I'll just briefly touch on it. Just when Trump was elected and there was the Women's March, and I feel like it really stirred up white feminism and showed its flaws. And I had that experience of having good intentions and not realizing how much I was missing the mark on so many things and being called out for it and feeling defensive and going to, I'm a piece of shit. And then eventually coming to, oh, no, it's not about me. It's not about whether I'm a good person or a bad person. It's just a fact. So I think it's probably a similar thing that progressive white men are going through. that they hear that as a criticism or as saying that they are bad people. And I think at the end of the day, you have to push past that, and you have to get to the point where you realize no one is, first of all, saying you're a bad person. And secondly, by getting more focused on how you feel about being told that than about what you're being told, is recentering yourself. You're making it about you and your feelings, right? And so if you can just table that for a minute and focus on what is being said to you and really hear that and absorb that, then we can actually like make steps to understanding each other.
I think that's exactly right. That's what anti-racism is, right? That's right. I say this a lot. It's like anti-racism slash anti-bigotry. I like saying anti-bigotry because that is more inclusive of all the problems that we have here, right? The core of that, I think, it starts. I mean, it's a macro and there's a micro, but the micro, like inside of me, that is so important, right? Because that's how we can build bridges with each other, right? If I feel like I can trust you as a white person, as a white man, as a white woman, then we can work together, right? Here we are doing this, right? And that's why after I talked to you the very first time when we talked, when we talked, I was like, oh, this woman gets it. Right. This woman's on the team. She gets it. And you know, I'm an emotional guy. Like, I'm also incredibly cerebral in some ways, like weirdly and creepily cerebral sometimes. Like, but I just mean in terms of like, just like, you know, being able to think about things in very analytical terms. I mean, I think that's part of being a lawyer, I think is, and that's how we're trained, is to really set aside the feelings of it and just talk about things in very, very analytical terms.
Well, it can also be a defense mechanism against feeling the feelings.
Yeah. Right.
I do that too. So I'm speaking for myself.
You know, I think that, but I think that it's important that, what I'm getting at is that it's important that we're prepared to look at ourselves and, you know, and I'm an emotionally driven guy, and that can be overwhelming sometimes, but I do think it's really critical that we're prepared to look at ourselves. I think that is at the core of anti-racism. I think that is the core of how we find community, right? And that is how we find community and how we move forward, how we deal with all of this. But I want to, you know, talk for you to, and maybe you've already talked about this, but, do you want to talk about this? 'Cause I talked a lot about this from the generational trauma from the Black perspective. Do you want to talk more about it from the female perspective? And maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've touched on a lot of things already. I think in some ways, misogyny is almost the sneakiest of them all, and I think part of that has just been around forever, like for recorded history. Like, you know,
when you Liz think misogyny, like what does that mean? What does that mean for you?
It's sort of a shorthand for the impacts that result from a patriarchal society upon women. Impacts on women that result from a patriarchal society. There we go. I think it's a shorthand. It can mean lots of things. But if you think about all major cultures have been patriarchies where women are second-class citizens, literally second-class citizens. I mean, we couldn't vote until 100 years ago. So, you know, we're not in the Constitution, like I said before. So the other aspect of that, and I found some of this information from this really great article that I'll link in the show notes. But when you have a group of people like that who, since the beginning of recorded history, have been second-class citizens, it opens the door to all kinds of structural abuses, right? I mean, like, I'll just read this. Women have been traumatized through physical, sexual, emotional, and economic abuse. It happens on such a large scale, and has happened on such a large scale, that we don't even recognize it as trauma. And that goes back to what I was saying before about peeling that onion since I was 18 years old. Things that I just thought were, this is just the world we live in, or this is just who I am, and realizing like, no, that is abuse, or that is a result of trauma. And it's not okay. And for me, the Me Too movement was another big eye opener, because it was the kind of thing, and every woman I talk to about this says almost the exact same thing. We almost were all walking around thinking it was just us and thinking it was our problem, that I'm too sensitive, or I led him on, or I shouldn't have done this, or I shouldn't have done that. And that's the whole thing of putting the responsibility for a woman's physical safety is all on her, and none of the responsibility is on the attacker or the abuser. So another quote from this article is, the status of second class has allowed men to rape, beat, murder, mutilate, starve, and control women for thousands of years. So when you talk about this, and I read that sentence and I just thought, that's it. That's the entire thing. Because you break down that one sentence. So you talk about rape, you talk about rape culture, right? Like the fact, like I was saying, that women are responsible for sidebar, but connected. We recently got an email from my children's school, elementary school, reminding us of the summer dress code. I should have kept a copy of this to read. It was so blatantly directed at girls. And I do say girls, not women. And it's talking about body contouring clothing, no tank tops, no cutoffs, no shorts that go, or shorts and skirts have to go past the fingertips when you extend your arm. So this whole thing, the fact that this even exists still, and yes, I am fighting it. In New Jersey, which is supposed to be pretty progressive, it's a real holdover from, it looked like a dress code from when I was a kid in like the 80s or the 90s. And there wasn't this same awareness. This onion hadn't been peeled back yet about what you're teaching girls when you tell them, police what you wear because it could impact how you are treated in the world, right? And when I was in 9th grade, we had a mandatory self-defense class for the girls. The focus is always on rape prevention. It lies in the hands of women. You can extrapolate the same thing with pregnancy and abortion. I mean, women can conceive a child for basically like 1 day a month. No, that's not true. 5 days a month. Just edit that. 5 days a month. But then if they get pregnant, they can't have another child for 9 months, right? Men can make babies, multiple babies every day for their whole lives. Tell me why women are on birth control. It's things like that nobody questions that. And you know why women are on birth control? Because it has side effects. And the male doctors who invented pills don't want the side effects. Because there have been male birth control pills, but they have side effects.
Let the women bear the
so
burden,
just let the women
always.
keep doing it. Right? As always. Right. I got off topic, but that's all from rape culture. Murder, beat, domestic violence, the crazy statistics that women are most likely to die at the hands of their partner, like their romantic partner. I had this conversation with my therapist the other day that there's this, and my mother separately, that every woman has an awareness that if she's in a partnership with a man, that man could kill her. And you just know that in the back of your head, no matter how much you love each other, no matter how safe you generally feel, there is that like primal knowledge that is possible. You talk about mutilate and starve. Look at the beauty norms in this culture. Look at like fat shaming. Look at the way these like unattainable norms are held up, right? And then you have girls with anorexia, bulimia, all these body dysmorphia, and all this stuff is designed specifically so that we put all our energy into buying beauty creams and anti-wrinkle this and anti-aging this and starving ourselves so that we don't have the time or headspace or energy to actually do anything with our lives beyond making ourselves into what will be acceptable to a man. Like, that is the goal. So even now that, you know, we have so much equality that women can be CEOs and all this kind of stuff, those women are still spending thousands of dollars on beauty treatments. They are still wasting time trying to find the man of their dreams or whatever bullshit kind of way they're trying to fit into this idea of what women should be, right? And all that goes back to control. Same with abortion access. And it's all legislated, abortion access in particular, legislating women is less than human, right? Like, you don't get to control what happens to your body because there's another potential life in there. So now your humanity, whatever little we deigned to give you, is completely gone now, irrelevant. So, yeah. And I feel like when you look at, and that's now, and you look at centuries ago, and it was much more blatant, like women were literally property, right? And you talk about generational trauma, that gets passed down. That's in your genes, and it's all survival mechanisms. Mothers teach their daughters, this is how you survive in a patriarchy, whatever stage of patriarchy they were at. And you learn these lessons either overtly, or you watch your mother and the way she behaves, the way she gets what she wants, and you absorb it, right? And you think about that kind of stuff, and how could we not be impacted physically by that, right? And not just physically, but limited in what we can do with our time on Earth. So it's just, yeah. Anyway,
that's
but
a lot.
It's a lot, and I think it takes a long time to unpack it because, like I said, the more you think about it, the more
totally
you see it.
You know, and I think of myself as a really progressive guy, but even just and thoughtful about this stuff, but even, you know, just hearing you talk about it, right? I mean, I can hear, I first of all, I'm hearing stuff that that may, even if I know that it exists in the abstract, right? It's different to hear you talk about with your mom, right? You know, about, or your therapist about, you know, like this visceral knowledge that your husband could, not that he would, but he could, right? Right. You know what I mean? And like that, you know, and that's like, you know,
right.
And I think about, and then I have to think about it in terms of my wife, you know, and, I don't know. I think it's so important that we have these conversations.
Right. Right. Because I think there's also this risk, and the same with you and your experience as a Black man in America, like, and just, I think all people do this. We often assume that what we know from our experiences, other people know too. Right. And maybe they don't. And I guess, and also the Me Too thing, that's what was eye-opening for me. I had so many conversations with the men in my life where they were just, they were amazing because they were like, tell me more. Like, I did not know this. I did not know that you hold your car keys a certain way when you walk by yourself at night. Like, I did not know that you don't walk that down that street. I did not know that you don't go running at night. Like, and that you have to think about these things. So I guess, but the first step in that is to become aware of it yourself, right? And understand that is trauma that you're holding on.
Right. It's not just the way it is. This is the way it is. The system's not inevitable, right? You know, like, it's not inevitable. This is abuse, right? And these are trauma responses. I do think it's so important to understand that. And what you said too, I mean, like, I do remember the Me Too movement. I do remember I'd actually had a bit of an awakening prior to that. As I mentioned, I had a girlfriend maybe like 10, 12 years ago who really laid dead law down for me. And it started with, we were at a bar and some guy was crying into his beer about how, you know, he can't see his kids and stuff like that. His wife, his girlfriend is so mean and da-da-da-da. And I was relaying the story, and my girlfriend at the time laid down the law. She was like, Let me tell you a little bit about women's experiences. And that really was a big eye opener for me, but still, Me Too, the extent of it was a lot, was still very much a learning experience for me. And it's still a learning, even talking to you now is still a learning experience for me. And I think that what we can do for each other, for those of us who care about these issues and want to be progressive is listen to each other's stories, you know? I mean, and I think part of what we do is, you know, I want to talk about like what do we do about all of this? And I think part of what we do about all of this is one element is the community element. Like, I can't tell every time I talk to somebody who gets it, not to anybody, because sometimes that can make it worse. Trying to talk to somebody who just brushes it off makes it so much fucking worse. And it's so hurtful, but talking to somebody who I can trust. And that's like, it is so liberating and it is so gratifying. And I hope that is the community that we can start here on this podcast.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, one of my things, you know, if I think we can move to our next thought processes, which I think should be, you know, where do we go from here, right? Like self-care, like what are our takeaways? What are our next steps? And I do think that like self-care is top of the list there, especially if you are a member of a marginalized group who is working through this stuff and trying to like talk to other people about it and seeing the things happening in the world. If you're just constantly in a state of like heightened rage and terror, then you're useless, right? I mean, you think about like also in The Body Keeps the Score. And actually another book I have called Burnout, they talk about it's really geeky and I love it. There's like pictures of brains and stuff. But it talks about the fight, flight, fawn, and freeze response, and all the chemicals that are released in your brain, in your body, and how in PTSD you can get stuck in that loop. You go into the fight or flight response, and then you are not able to change the thing that is causing your body to panic, right? And so you stay in that response, and then you have those heightened, those stress hormones, everything, and it wears you down physically, and then you can't do it, and you're unhealthy. And so I think for women, and I think for Black people, I think in a lot of ways we have intergenerational, I mean, we do have intergenerational PTSD, but we're all stuck in some version of that stress loop, right? So I think the first thing to do is to like learn how to close that stress loop. And I think one of the ways is community, like you're saying, because for sure, when I talk to like-minded women, because can't be any women.
A lot of crumb maidens out there.
Because there are a lot of crumb maidens out there. And not even necessarily crumb maidens, but like a lot of people just aren't actively doing the work of peeling back the onion. They're just living their lives blissfully unaware. Maybe not blissful, but definitely unaware. And it's different. So when you speak to people who have shared experience and are on the same wavelength with you, there's something so comforting about not having to explain yourself and just have that shorthand with somebody. And I think also with people who share versions of a similar trauma, I think it's very helpful. So I think there's definitely something that happens in the body when you have that kind of community where it's soothing, right?
I think that's absolutely right. And it's for me, it's also about having the courage and finding, and some of the courage comes from a community, right? But having the courage to say like, no, this is a person who I don't feel comfortable with, right? I'm not going to pretend that this person is somebody that they're not.
Right.
And this comes like specifically from my experience about being around mostly white men. You know, it's like, you know, there's many times that I've been burned, right? Where I've tried to talk about this, and it's just like, and again, that's that's hurtful. I think self-care is being careful about who you talk to about this stuff. I think that's really important. I think giving your psyche a break is really important. I mean, this is something that I've learned too, is like, you know, turn off your fucking phone. I literally have my phone on do not disturb. I only look, so it doesn't ping me. So I have that automatic reaction and I go, because like, and sometimes it's like, sometimes you don't need to get into the absolute weeds about a topic. Like, right. I like saying this is like, everything that's happening now, the causes of it are in the past, right? Like, you're not going to change what's happening right now by reading a million articles about it, right? Like, you're not gonna, right? Maybe you can move forward with that, but the point is that like, you're not obligated. I'm not obligated to know every single thing about every single thing that's happening, because it causes overwhelm. It causes overwhelm. It is especially when it's literally about you. Yes. It's about your life, right? Think about, I mean, you're reading about abortion. I mean, I just can't imagine. I just reading about this. I couldn't read everything about Buffalo. I couldn't do it. I didn't want to get into the weeds about that. Like, I know what's happening there. I'm feeling this viscerally. I don't need, and sometimes putting some, even if you want to go back to it, maybe some time later, when you're not in that heightened emotional state. And I think we live in a culture that says, especially those of us who are progressive, like, oh, I just need to be on top of all these issues. Like, I care about all these issues matter. And they do all matter. They really, really do. But it's not our responsibility to know everything about everything. We can't do it, and it's not healthy. You physically can't.
Right.
It's impossible.
You physically can't. It's impossible. It's impossible. And I also think like the way social media and stuff is set up, that it's an outrage machine. Like, it wants you to get on that. And just now, as you were speaking this, I had this realization that I do this. I think in a way, the last, like, since Trump has been elected, it's been a little bit of a training, like intense training ground for how to like have something intense and overwhelming happen to you and then still be able to live your life, like to not sit in that. And I realize, I think part of it is, it's like you get into that stress response. And for me, I'll speak for me, that I think one of the reasons that I will go back and scroll is it's almost like I'm looking for a way to end it. Like, I'm like, let's get to the end of it. Like, I got to figure it out. Right. And having that awareness that like, that's not how that's going to happen. So like, put the phone down, because you're just getting deeper into that adrenaline. Like, it's not helping.
Understanding systems are super important. Systems change really slowly. So like I said, like everything that's happening now, no matter how much we scroll, we're not going to change that. Like those events, the causes are years in the past. And now we are talking, now we are living the causes of what's going to happen in years from now. That's how it works. So the key is to focus on today, presently. What can I do? First of all, to stay sane, just to be okay, right? And a lot of that means just shutting the goddamn phone off, honestly, and just be with your children, be with your friends, be with your community, right?
Yeah. There's that Oregon Trail generation
exactly.
thing
There is a life before that. Like. And I am not anti-technology at all. Like, I love technology. I love my phone. I think it has improved our lives mostly. Social media, though, and like you said, the addictive element of social media, and even just how the news now comes out, it is not good, and it just it perpetuates the state of like constant and that's not good. You know,
And I love your point about that we are living the effects of things that have happened already years in the past, and that we're not going to find the solution right now on social media, because I think subconsciously part of me is looking for like, I need like the perfect quote or the perfect soundbite or the perfect video that's just going to feel like, oh, that's it. That's going to fix it. And It ain't there.
That's just not how systems work. That's just not how systems work. And we are flowing through us. We are just little pieces flowing through a system. And really our job is to survive it. Like that is our job, to emotionally survive it and do our little bit to pitch in. That's it for the future.
Right. Well, this is interesting because speaking of generational trauma, I think both you and I are probably dealing with conditioning.
Yes. Big time.
Subservient conditioning. Help, like we're the ones who do the work, right? Like we want to fix the things. And to the idea of sometimes the idea of putting the phone down almost feels selfish to me. Like who am I to think that I can take a break from the news? Like to take care of yourself. Right. No,
I understand that feeling. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. This goes back to my yuppie comment at the top. Like, so nice. I just get to just check out of it, right? Whenever I want. Like, and that is pure privilege, right?
Right.
But it is. But the opposite of that is not just obsessing over the news, right? Like that's not the opposite of that. The opposite of that is finding a useful way to be part of this, So
yeah, 100. No, I think taking care of ourselves is probably like top of the list, and learning how, kind of like I was saying at the beginning, learning how to like live in a world where you can know what's going on and still live in your actual real life. Part of our trauma is that we've been completely disenfranchised from our own body, like bodily autonomy, right? And trauma does that too. It disconnects you from your body. So we've got these two double things that are like making us, so for us to focus on our physical bodies and like how we're feeling and where are we in space and be here now and take care of our bodies is actually like a pretty revolutionary act in itself. So I think that's crucial. And one of those things is breath work. You can listen to music, you can do smells, what smells good, but and mindfulness, meditation, all that stuff is good. But I think, taking ownership of your body.
That's such a great point. I mean, I find just like walking barefoot in grass, like there's something, right? Like, and my phone's inside, right? And I'm just like, and it's like, there's something about that it's like, I mean, I find motorcycling is a huge part of that for me as well, right? Because believe me, if I wanted to get my notifications through my helmet and through my phone, I could. Like, there's plenty of technology for that, but I really try to stay away from that. I just want the directions because, being here now is really important because like you said, it's a radical act for women and people of color to take care of their own bodies is a radical act in and of itself. And second of all, like it puts us in a space where we can be, I think, really have the mental, emotional capacity to have that radical empathy.
I just loved what you said about if we're in a stress response and then we're in survival mode. And your prefrontal cortex isn't going to work as well when you're in survival mode. And that's what you need to activate to experience radical empathy. Like you need to be okay in order to be able to understand where other people are coming from, or even to take the time and have the awareness to think about that.
Take care of yourself.
Yeah, that's crucial. Take care of yourself. Yeah.
That's that Oregon Trail generation stuff coming in. I mean, like Liz, I mean, this is so great. And setting aside that this is a podcast, setting aside that clips of this will be on social media, literally just the conversation is incredibly valuable to me. So thank you. Mm-hmm. It was just we got something out of it. Positive so there you experience. Go. So, everybody out there, thanks for listening. We are Difo and we are Liz. We are Liz and we are Difo. We're still working on the mechanics of how this is all going to work out. But we're two people who really enjoy speaking to each other and speaking to you. So thanks for being here. Welcome back, and I hope that you enjoyed the inaugural conversation between Liz and me. Liz is really an amazing person. She's a powerful feminist, and I'm super glad that she's joined the team here at the Radical Secular. I hope that we're able to hear more and more from her as time goes on. So now the audience has heard a lot about what Liz and I think about transgenerational trauma, about Buffalo, about Texas. I want to hear now what you two have to say about it. What is there to say? But I want to just give you guys both the floor here to express yourselves. Joe, you want to take us away?
Well, I really enjoyed your take and Liz's take on the subject. I thought it was really insightful. That's a lot there to talk about, but let me just add in a few things that it just came to mind when I was watching you guys talk. The one thing first is the idea of trying to, radical empathy is a great concept. I love it. I think we need to think about it critically as well. And I think one of the things about how do you square lived experience with empathy? Like here I am. I don't have the experience that a woman has, or a person of color has, or an indigenous person. I don't have those experiences. And we all are limited by our own lived experience one way or another. But yet at the same time, you have, Christophe, this concept you talked about of radical empathy. I mean, that may be a way to a certain extent bridge the gap. I don't think you can ever 100% bridge the gap, but I do think that we humans are incredibly empathetic by nature. I think if we cultivate that, I think if we nurture that, we can come together and we can understand each other. So important to listen. I mean, it all starts by listening and active listening, not multitasking and only partially listening, but fully being present and listening to someone. And that's what I did. When I listened to two of you talk, and when you talked about, the bringing up marginalized voices, I think that is actually a big part of the project. It's really critically important because we do need to share resources and we need to share our identities. We need to share ourselves far more than we have. And we are coming out of this vast epic of white male supremacy, religious supremacy. And it's going to take a bit of humble, patience from me, someone like me who's white and male and privileged in many ways, and being humble and really just listening and just not trying to. I do think that it is something that we all can think about. If you're a man, listen to women. If you're white, listen to people of color, listen to indigenous people. If you're a first worlder, listen to, the developing world, all of that. If you're able-bodied, listen to people who are disabled. That's critically important that we do that. And we find a way to do it systematically, not just, we need to do it on a personal level, but also systematically. I think I don't know before I move to, I got a lot I want to say, but I don't want to, let me just start with that. What do you guys think about, that notion?
Yeah, well, I wanted to react a bit to the segment, because there were a couple things in there that really, spoke to me. And especially when, Liz was talking about how she initially was resisting the idea of going to a women's study, course, and then becoming aware of why she needed that course. And I think, that was a reflection of such a widespread phenomenon in that oppressed people don't really recognize their oppression. And you were saying the same thing, Christophe, when you talked about growing up around mostly white people and really not having the sense of blackness and why that was important to cultivate, because there was, at least for a certain point, and when things were moving forward on civil rights, there was a certain sense that we were becoming post-racial, and a lot of people still try to pretend that we are. And those are, of course, the same people who want to sweep all of these issues back under the carpet. So what we all want, which is a society of full equality, the fantasy of that can get in the way of the reality of that. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing here. And I've been talking a lot on social media about, gender traders. In the past, we've talked about race traders and how that's come up. And we've seen, some of the very worst people like Clarence Thomas and Tim Scott and others, who are so deep into this project of overturning democracy and especially for people of color. And then we see the women. We see that it was Phyllis Schlafly who overturned the ERA. And we've said all this before, that the women who were in that hearing for Ketanji Brown Jackson and who were asking her to define a woman, and how ironic that was, that you have these women who they're only there because of the actions of liberal firebrands like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like other people who paved the way, Susan B. Anthony, you go on and on, women's suffrage who paved the way for that. And that is the only reason these people are in these positions of power at all. Do you think Clarence Thomas would be in that position at all if it wasn't for the firebrand black civil rights leaders? And then he's going and turning around trying to slam the door. It's like, so this is an incredible frustration for me. And I think it really, it highlights why, Christophe, I think your journey has been so important. And I think your journey has also happened through this show and through our interactions and some of the things that we got into talking about blackness and whiteness. And I think it's come up even to the point sometimes of friction where there has been the macrocosm of what exists in society is also present between those of us who are trying to do good. And so it's something that we all have to just keep thinking about and keep being aware of. And I wanted to bring up my experience as a white progressive. And Joe, I'm sure you probably relate to this as well. We are in a sort of, a niche identity, right? We are subject to all of the terms of white privilege. We've experienced it. We've benefited from it. And yet at the same time, we're trying to develop this empathy. I get to the point where once I started realizing what was going on in this country, it causes me physical pain to watch these things happen. And I'm not just talking about mass shootings. I'm talking about, I'll read something. Somebody posted on Facebook about a woman 100 years ago who was thrown in jail for 10 years for marrying a black man. He fled the country, and the judge who threw her in jail said, "I wish I could throw her in jail for longer." And my response to that, and I think it's probably the first time I've actually said this out loud or in writing anywhere, is I hate this country. And I don't want to feel that way. Like this is painful. This is horrible to recognize that this is a legacy that we're all a part of. And one of the things for me as a white progressive who's trying to make changes here, I end up having to stand up against a lot of other white people who say things to me like, why do you hate yourself? Why do you hate yourself? This is a question that a white progressive man has to ask, right? Because they see me and Joe as a threat to their privilege. And so I'm saying, no, I don't hate myself. I'm embarrassed by the way people who look like me act. And I'm embarrassed the way when a black person sees me, they interpret me and the things that I do and say through the lens of a person with white privilege. Now that does not make me oppressed. I want to be very clear about that. This does not make me oppressed in any way, but it is something that those of us who are trying to make changes have to deal with, is that we get all of this pushback from our own group. And it's a lot more prevalent than you think. I mean, I've had conversations with white men who are immediately like knee-jerk reacting in the Amber Heard trial, and Johnny Depp, right? And they're just all in for Johnny Depp, and she's a liar and she's a bitch and she's this and that, right? And we know that that's not a situation with a perfect victim. We know that there are problems there, but the way that she's being dragged in front of the cameras and dragged through the mud and kind of crucified there is an extension of the abuse. And no matter what happened, no matter what went on there was abuse there, and she doesn't have to be a perfect victim. So these are just all the thoughts that have been percolating in my mind for the last couple of weeks, and that have been really brought up. And you guys spoke to them really, really well in your segment. And so I don't know. I guess I'll let somebody else talk.
I appreciate that, Sean. Thank you. Go ahead.
My sister was very, very upset about the leaked position paper, the Alito and abortion. And really angry at men, for that in general. And, and she's a lovely, wonderful person, and she loves me dearly. But she was still angry at men. And like, I have to, I understand that, and I do, and I accept it. And I empathize with her. And I say, yes, I know what you're saying. You have a right to be, because even though I'm not the one doing that, there's just too many white men doing really bad things right now. Too many. It's not just a bad apple thing, really. And so, like for the rest of us who are trying to be the right people, the good people, and progressive and ethical and so forth, part of that is understanding. And, like I've been around radical people all my life. I've been around, LGBTQ plus community and people of color and women and feminists and like really hardcore, like socialists all my life. And man, I'll tell you, like I've been treated wonderfully by them. Like as a white man, they've given me respect. Like, so what do I have to complain about? Like, I honestly, I get more shit from other white men in some ways, right? Like what you were saying, Sean. But like,
well, that's it. No, that's absolutely it.
It's like, yeah, bitch us out. Go ahead. If you need to do that, if you need to be angry and upset, yeah, that's okay. Do it. As far as I'm concerned, for what it's worth. I mean, like the only thing is like sometimes it's sad because like, I'm the kind of person that I really feel like I have an ethical responsibility to be a kind person and to be a nonviolent person and to be a loving person in the right way, right? For the right people in the right circumstances. But yet I do carry this weight of history because of who I am. And I just have to balance that out somehow. But there are times when I'm like surprised by it. And sometimes I get a little defensive or react, and when I catch myself pretty easily now, and I kind of laugh at myself for that because it is not about me, right? It's about humanity. And so that's where I'm coming from. Like, and I'm flawed like everybody else. Everyone is. Like, we are all flawed, and that's what being human's all about. So the best you can do is just kind of be honest about it and come to terms with it. I did want to talk about a little bit about the epigenetics, if you guys don't mind. If you want. Definitely. Because I find that, we do a lot of science on this show, and it'll take a few minutes just to sort of hash that out a little bit. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. I did do some reading about it a while back. I was interested in it. And the idea behind that, and Liz, I think, talked about it pretty well, in your segment. It's really how experience registers in biology. And, it doesn't change the DNA code, but what it does change is the tags around the code, these methylene tags, chemical tags. And then those have a function in how the code is expressed. So you might have a gene for something, but it may not be able to express because of these extra tags. And I think the studies are coming out now that then these tags themselves, which are in between the genetic letters, can be transferred into the zygotes, the sperm and the egg, and then affect the fetus growth. So what happens is that it's looking like that chronic severe trauma does alter the epigenetics of people that then get transferred to future generations. To the extent of that is still unclear, right? How much of that is responsible for a lot of what we see versus other things. But it is something to think about because there is so much trauma in our world. I mean, think about I was talking to my wife about it earlier today, and she was saying, it would be interesting to look at Laotians, right? They went through the genocide in the 1970s and seeing what their children are like. There's been so much trauma.
There has been.
Indigenous people all around the world. Oh my God,
absolutely.
I mean, and then that plays out into all of poverty and crime and alcoholism and all of this stuff. And then the right comes down,
Exactly right.
When we talked about that book, Charles Murray book, and we talked about the statistics of IQ and crime and things like that. And it stands to reason that this would have a chemical intergenerational basis, right? It stands to reason. And, that's not all it is, of course. It's, how many words are spoken in the home, how much time do the parents get to spend with their kids? All of these things are affected by economics. All of these things are affected by trauma that is inflicted and culture. Yeah. So it all makes sense. And I think the frustration that I have with this is that, yes, we can talk about it and we can say, and we can recognize this thing, but, mental health has been deprioritized. We can't even get physical health care. We can't, all of the things that we've tried to do for making society better and for helping marginalized people have all fallen. The Republican axe has fallen on every single last one of those things. And here's this is another example of the shit of being a progressive and being sort of caught in the squeeze play there. Like I had a conservative say to me, well, we spent X number of trillions of dollars trying to fix poverty and it hasn't worked. It's like, well, what's your proposal? Right? They don't have one. Right. They don't have one. And the same thing with gun control. They don't have a proposal to fix this stuff. Because
the proposal is just leave it as it is.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not true. It has worked.
It's not true.
It's not true at all. Go to Brazil.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, is that my response to this conservative who was talking this way was to say, the project never had a chance to finish, because it's like, how can you do anything where, it's like trying to build a building in the middle of a war zone, right? It's constantly being bombed and sabotaged by the enemy. How do you ever expect it to work? You're like, oh, we spent all this time and money building this building, but there's no building. Well, yeah, because you were trying to destroy it the whole time.
Exactly right. It's exactly right. No, I totally hear you on that. And I just real quick, to go back to what you guys were talking about, I definitely do sympathize with the being in the middle piece, being in that sort of being that's the squeeze play, as you put it, Sean. I think that's a good way to put it. I think it is hard. I can, I think I experience this on the sense of being a man, right? And having a woman and having a woman say men are fucking awful. And I've gotten to the point now where I say men are fucking awful, right? Like that, right? Like, right. You know what I mean? Like that's where I've gotten, right? And that is, and I get it. Like, I understand what it's like. It's because you're mad at the system, right? You're mad at the system. The individuals were beside the point, really. Like, really, you're mad at the system. And and individuals are manifestations of that system and have been affected by that system. But I think that being able to parse those two things out, like both of you guys have talked about, I think is an important part of being privileged, right? To be able to put in whatever way one is privileged. And I really want to say thank you for bringing up, Joe, the first world privilege, because that's a fucking huge one.
It is
fucking huge one.
It's much bigger than people realize.
Often ignored, but it is a huge one. A huge one. Anyway, I'm sorry, Joe. You were about to say.
Well, I mean, here's another thing that I wanted to kind of that I was thinking about, and something you said, Christophe, during the piece was about how you need to step away sometimes, and you just put your phone down, and get off social media,
which is really hard to do.
It's hard to do, and there's almost a guilt associated with it. Like you don't want to check out because you feel like you need to be responsible and pay attention and all that. But also, going back to the epigenetics and how, there are changes, physiological changes that can happen. There's actually some studies that show that even just listening to stories can cause that trauma. Like there was this one study looking at children of Holocaust survivors and how they heard those stories through their lives and how they in turn have really got a lot of PTSD from the stories themselves. The human mind is incredible. I mean, the fact that the stories come into our heads actually are as real as reality. They can be sometimes. And so we have to watch that in ourselves, that we balance our being aware and being informed with being well and healthy. So we've got to find our own personal balance. Everyone's going to be different. And I think it's important that we're mindful of that. Because the trauma.
Yeah, it's true. One of the things that keeps me glued to the news is that, And I finally realized this at one point. It's like, why do you just want to keep reading this bad news? And it's not that. It's not that I just want to keep reading bad news. It's that I'm just hoping that at some point I'll pick up some nugget of some hope that this is going to turn around. So when I'm looking at these dark headlines and reading the Drudge Report and all this awful news, and even when I look at Fox, because their stuff is just so vile, I'm looking at it just say like, is somebody maybe at Fox, is one person going to ever get like, are we going to have some movement? I mean, are they turning on Trumpism? Are they starting to get it about guns? Like, is there any hope here? And that's what I'm grasping for, is some shred of hope that maybe there'll be a groundswell at some point to turn some of these things around, rather than just this heavy thumb on the scale of just, fascism.
Yeah, looking for hope, I think, is important. I think that is, I do think one of the things that I'm hopeful about is the unionizations that we're seeing, right? Like that is a glimmer of hope, a glimmer. It's just a glimmer, but it's something. Joe, go ahead.
No, I agree. I do think we need to be realistic and not be Pollyannic, but also when there is hope, let's not deny it. Like and sometimes you're so angry and you're so upset, you don't want to even hear anything positive. You get to that point sometimes, you just don't even hear it. Like, shut the fuck up. Don't tell me this. Don't tell me to look at the sunny side of it. I mean, I want to grieve. I want to be angry. Sometimes you get that way. And it's like, a lot of times there is no sunny side to a lot of these situations that we're talking about. There's no sunny side to Roe v. Wade, being overturned. I mean, there isn't. It's even if it resulted ultimately in driving the Republicans from power, because maybe somehow women galvanized and men galvanized to support women and drove them from power. Still, there would be millions of women who would be traumatized by this overturning of Roe v. Wade. So
are being in the process right now. It's happening literally right now.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. The trauma already because of what's happening. Just one thing on top of another, not a chance to breathe. There's no chance to breathe. One thing after another. But maintaining emotional health is not a luxury. That's the thing you got to remind yourself. It's not a luxury.
Good point.
It's a necessity. You're not like, okay, so you don't want to check out completely. You don't want to be in denial. You want to be engaged. Yes, for sure. And for people who check out completely, all right, I mean, that's just not a cool thing to do at all. But at the same time, you've got to balance it with, and sometimes also a good way to balance it is by being active and by feeling like you're doing something.
Yes.
Like that sense of powerlessness is really crippling. And it's bad for you. Like it's literally physiologically bad for you. Powerlessness causes disease. I mean, honestly. And
it does. Well, so hopelessness too. And the feeling, the way that I've been feeling these last few weeks with these things going on has literally made has impacted my body.
Yeah, it really does.
Me too. Mine too, for sure. Oh, no doubt about that. No doubt about that.
So, one of the things I wanted to, I don't, we have a lot of time to talk about it, but I do want to explore, Dr. Is it DeGruy, was it? Joy DeGruy?
Yeah, DeGruy, yeah. It's hard. I think that's how it's said.
Yeah, her concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome is really interesting to think about because that's one way of taking what we're talking about and like having a rational system, like thinking about it in a systematic way, right? Like, how can we understand the world? How do we understand what's happening today to people, right? And we can look back and look at these patterns, right? And these legacies. And then from that, we can do good things, Like if that is indeed the case, that there is this post-trauma around not just slavery, but then Jim Crow and all of it, right? All the way up to today, to
all the way up to today.
The murder of, how many, was it 15 African Americans something like that. Like it's still like, if that is indeed the case, then we can come up with rational solutions like truth and reconciliation, right? Like doing a process of that. There's a legitimacy to that. Like, because we need to do it because it's good for us, all of us, but particularly the people who are directly affected, right? The descendants of enslaved people, though in particular, but also all of us. And so, like, we do need to walk
our nation.
The whole world, really, right? Mm-hmm. We need to walk these paths, right, that are intertwined. One of them is this emotional path of trying to be healthy and trying to be active and trying to be useful and purposeful. And another one of being engaged with sort of the rational, intellectual side of it and to try to figure out, well, what can we do? And it's not easy because, you know, the emotions can really weigh you down.
They really can.
They really can.
Well, I wanted to say something about that too, in the sense that, we talk about something like reparations, for example. And we could make a strong economic case for reparations and as to why, people who were deprived and defrauded of their land, their labor, their lives, for so many generations deserve to have like financial reparations. But there's something beyond the economic case for that. And that is that right now, when you look at all of these things that happen to Black Americans specifically, there are just an endless supply of messages coming from the top. And yes. even the fact that we had President Obama, we had President Biden, but still, from the cops, from local leaders, from Fox News, from the Republican politicians, saying things like, calling shithole countries, whatever it is, like there is just a steady stream of messages that you are not worthy. You are not real Americans. You do not belong here, kind of thing. And that cannot be overestimated, the impact of that. And so
I sure can't.
If we were to enact reparations, even in a nominal form, even if you were giving each person like $500 a month or something like that, it would never make up for the economic losses that families have endured. But what it would do is it would say, we value you. You belong here. You are a part of this nation. We will take care of you.
Right.
And that is the message. That's the only thing that can reverse trauma. And even then, it's not going to happen overnight.
Validation.
Really well. That's exactly right, Sean. I think both of you are hitting this, I think really importantly. And when I think about Buffalo, when I think about, the aftermath of Buffalo, the feeling on the outside looking in is the feeling like I am not part of the group. Seeing this video of this kid pointing at a white man, oh, sorry, and then going and shooting a Black person, like that video is online right now, right? Like saying, sorry, man.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
is that what happened?
Yeah. He pointed the gun at a white guy on the ground and said, oh, sorry, and then keeps moving and shit to shoot Black people. So that specific targeting it's just a screaming megaphone. This is not your country. We will steal your labor, but this is not your country. We will let you fight and die for us, but this is not your country. And you're saying, Sean, you hit the nail on the head there. The effect of that, especially generation after generation after generation, cannot be overstated. It cannot be overstated. In some ways, it's as bad as the financial element, which is also robbery.
Well, what really got to me was that, okay, why was that grocery store there in the first place? That grocery store was there because that area was a food desert. And so all of the white corporations, whatever, haven't seen fit to put grocery stores into Black communities because for whatever reason, I guess they don't think Black people have to eat. I mean, this is fucking ridiculous, right? They're not there. And so what ends up happening is people can go to fast food. They might not have transportation to even get to the store. How do you buy frozen food or anything that, if you have to ride the bus home, it takes 2 hours. I mean, it's just like, it's insane to think about what families are dealing with, right? So this store was put in place specifically to address that problem. And it was an oasis. It was a mecca for Black people to come and be seen as human and be seen as needing, and just living like we all have taken for granted that you can go to the grocery store, right? In your town. And, so even that is like sacred. That from a humanistic standpoint, that is fucking sacred. And this, I don't even have the words to refer to this shooter, came in and took that away.
And it's not just that, but it's also what you were saying earlier, Christophe, this like the twisting of the knife when people deny it and try to rationalize it and try to dismiss it away, rather than like validation. It's the very opposite of that, right?
Right.
It's like the worst kind of like, I don't even know what the word would be for it, but it's like,
such a great point. Like the whole Southern thing, the whole the whole lie about what the Civil War was about is just like literally an entire region of the country is saying, fuck you to black people. We refuse to acknowledge. We're going to deny. We're not going to acknowledge. Right. And it just the acknowledgement is so important. Both of you are hitting that. And I think that's very, very important. I agree.
Well, you know what? I think that the real issue is almost more than the fact that, this was a black grocery store in a majority black town. We go back to the Wilmington massacre, and the beef there, and I think also at Tulsa, was that black people and white people were starting to work together. And we're starting to have successful partnerships in business. People, there were black people who were being recognized, and that's the same thing here. I mean, the Buffalo has a black mayor, and he's an awesome dude, right? And so we have this recognition that there is a full participation in civic life, and that is what white supremacy cannot allow, and so
cannot tolerate it.
Cannot tolerate.
Yep. And no, that's a great point.
The same thing for women. You see how women politicians are so attacked.
Yeah.
When they get into
oh my God. Such a great point. Such a great point.
Like, there still is that visceral resistance to equality, in our society. Just visceral resistance, just like guttural, just like that people just get angry about it. And and it's like primitive almost. A lot of them don't even, they'll say, I'm not a racist. I'm not a sexist. But
right. No one's ever a racist or a sexist.
They display all the telltale signs of all of it, but they still say, they get angry at you when you subtly suggest that you maybe want to think about this might not be, this might be something that's a bigoted comment. Oh no,
Right.
It's the defense mechanisms, So what do we do, guys? What do we do? Christophe, when I heard about the shooting in Buffalo, my heart sank. And the same thing with, in Texas. It's just like if it does feel like helpless. I honestly think that, Sandy Hook broke me a little bit, broke me. After that, I couldn't even watch and listen to all these mass shootings anymore, or even comment on them for the longest time. But you have to, But it's like for somebody who's specifically being targeted, like African Americans were in Buffalo, it's there's a multiplying effect to that misery that I'm feeling, and that's what you're saying, and I get that. I understand what you're saying. I have and we have to be mindful of that too. That everyone's going to be in different groups and communities that are going to feel differently, and they're going to need to heal differently from all of this. I just hope we get a chance to heal.
Yeah, is it possible to heal? Because this is the part that really bothers me about this. Okay, it's not like it's every time this happens, it sort of pounds the nail in the coffin one more time that we're ever going to get reform. Because it used to be, there was a period of a couple of days where we just put our flags at half staff and everybody would be, we're really sad about this. And then, somebody would say, we need to get rid of the guns. And then the Republicans would say, don't politicize it. Now there's not even any waiting period. Immediately, the first thing that happens is, Ted Cruz gets up there and says, we're not taking the guns. And then, it's to the point now where, and then Smith & Wesson stock goes up, everybody runs out and buys more guns. It's just, every time this happens, it strengthens and underscores the futility of the situation. And that's what it is for me. It's like, and we see, as I've said many times, talking about the GOP death cult, this is a death cult. This is a true death cult. Their policy is measured in dead children. And, they have this whole thing. They try to make it about abortion, right? As soon as you say, your policies are killing these kids, it's like, well, yeah, you're killing millions of babies. And it's just a disingenuous, in the end, there's no talking to these people.
There is no talking to these people. And guys, we're short on time now. And to your point, Joe, right? I mean, I think that what do? We talked about it a little bit in the segment. And I think it's got to be about prioritizing your own mental health. And then I think looking inside of oneself and saying, like, you know, what is the skill that I bring to the table that I can, that I can apply to this problem, to this issue, and you know, and getting used to the fact, and I hate to say this, but I think getting used to the fact that, you know, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And that is, I think, just the facts that we have to live with at this point. And we're talking like lifetimes and generations, I think. And that's a sad way to sort of close this out. But I just want to give you guys, if you guys have any final comments you want to make before we close out here.
Well, the last thing I want to say is that don't give up and don't be hopeless, because strange things happen. I mean, like, you know, how did we get FDR? How did we get that from that kind of society that we lived? How did we get Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement? How did those things happen?
That's right.
They happened under conditions that were pretty severe and totalizing, and yet they still happened. So there's always hope that, you know, things could turn around. I don't want to say it's going to happen. I don't know that. It may not, right? But I think what we can take from this is to be ready to participate, you know, to have situational awareness. Like, like the Me Too movement popped up out of nowhere. Unfortunately, it didn't last.
That's exactly right. Right.
But what if something like that happens again and it lasts for a while? Man, that would be very powerful. And it could happen. Right.
And it has generated changes. It has generated real changes. It really has. I mean, literally in the law, I've updated my documents about it, like recently, a new law. So go ahead, Sean.
Well, I was going to say that there have been a couple of good things. Who would have thought on February 24th that Ukraine might win this war? Okay.
That's true.
They might very well win this war. At the very least, they're going to keep Kyiv, and they're going to keep the bulk of their country. Right now, they're just fighting over what happens on the edges. And Russia has been humiliated. Okay. And so that has happened. The Southern Baptist Convention has released a 200-page list of sex offenders and people guilty of harassment from when. Who would have thought that could have happened? So there are bright spots and things that are good. You know, and when we see all these talking points and this whole nonsense that already happened with Sandy Hook and already happened with every other mass shooting, at some point, you know, minds can change. Minds can.
That's right.
We had the guy at is it Steve Kerr, basketball coach, said, "Hey, we got to get rid of the guns." Right? Nobody in sports has ever said anything like that, to my knowledge. So maybe it's breaking through on some level.
Yeah. I think that's right, guys. Both of you. I'm so glad we were able to close on this note, because I really do think that, and in the Picard, he said, the Picard show, he said, and maybe it's a good way to end it with Star Trek. On the Picard show, he said something along those very lines. It's like, it's always darkest right before the dawn, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I can't remember the exact language. It was very poetic because it was coming from Jean-Luc Picard, obviously. But it was along those lines. And it's like, you have to find the little glimmer of hope and hook onto that, for our own mental health. And so that when we are called upon to act, that we're prepared to do that. Another analogy is an earthquake. I mean, like a subduction zone, in earth science, right? Where the pressure builds and builds and builds and builds, and then it slips and you get an earthquake, right? And, but the pressure has to build first, and we have to find a way to survive until then. And gentlemen, I think that's a relatively hopeful note to close this really difficult show on. Best we can do. So everybody out there, please remember that if you do like our show, and you should damn well like our show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels, and you should also check out our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Christophe Difo. Thank you for being here, and remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
Radical Secular podcast is written and produced by Christophe Difo, Sean Prophet, and Joe Okipenti. Logo and main title designed by Tim Stetner. Post-production and original theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Sky Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipenti.